What's up, Buckeye fans? Welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy, here with you for another show. Today, if you're watching this live, you notice another new background for the live stream. We're going to test that out again. I thought it went well last week with just the colors. I found another different one here with, I don't know what this is. There's some trees in a hallway, it looks like. We're just experimenting here. You guys don't need to see the background of my apartment all the time, but let me know what you think if you have feelings one way or the other on the background. All right, we're going to talk Buckeyes today, and if you remember the game Truth or Dare, people played it as kids. Maybe you played it later on in life, a more adult version of the game. Today we're going to play an Ohio State-focused version of the game, specifically Ohio State spring practice, because during spring practice, during fall camp, you get a lot of things said. You see some things. There's a lot of information, I think, that comes out, and it's almost always positive and hopeful before the season starts. And I think that's a good thing, right? Everyone wants to be optimistic, especially when it's a program like Ohio State, where there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic. Coming off a national championship, even losing the amount of talent that Ohio State did, this is still a team that should be in contention to make another run at things in 2024, right? Or 2025, right? After 2024. So I think there are certainly reasons to be positive, but I also think you have to be able to kind of dive in between and read between the cracks and sort of identify what you think is real, what there is to be excited about. And then maybe some things that like, okay, I'll believe it when I see it type of thing. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to do some true or false, not Truth or Dare. That's a different game. As we go through this, the drink of the day, garage beer. Had a few of these lying around that I found, actually. They're from, I think, a few weeks ago. I think we took them down to a Columbus Crew tailgate. So didn't realize we still had some left over. So we're gonna sip on some of those on this Friday afternoon. As always, if you are watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. We post all of our videos from interviews. All of our podcasts end up on there. It's got great content. So please subscribe to that. Give it a thumbs up. Turn on alerts, all that, so you know when we post new stuff. And then if you're listening to the podcast version of this, like, subscribe, 5-star review, all of that really helps us out in terms of, continuing to grow the channel, which is something we are always aiming to do over at Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports. Let's get into it. Well, first, if you have questions, comments throughout this show, I'll remind people we had a pretty good amount of questions last week, and I love that kind of conversation. Even if it's just a comment that we can sort of debate back and forth, I'd like to have more of that. This is supposed to be a happy hour, right? Where we, if you're sitting at a happy hour with friends, you're debating, you're talking about things. Sometimes you disagree, sometimes you agree. Let's have that conversation here if you're watching this live. So feel free, if I say something that you want to comment on, feel free to throw that in the chat. If you have questions about what I'm talking about other Ohio State stuff, please feel free to throw that in the chat. I already see some familiar faces in there, or some familiar names. But let's get into it. And I think, as with most things when we're talking about this season, this offseason, let's start with the quarterbacks. You know the names by now: Lincoln Kienholz, Julian Sayin, Tavian St. Clair. But the true or false for this is, true or false, this is a real quarterback competition. And I think if you've paid attention to some of the stuff I've talked about this offseason, you know that I believe that is true, that this is a real quarterback competition. Do I think Julian Sayin is going to win the quarterback competition? Yes. Ultimately, I think that will be how it is. I think when you've looked at Ohio State in the past, whether it was a real quarterback competition, like, say, Will Howard, Devin Brown, even Kyle McCord, Devin Brown, I think those were real quarterback competitions. I think we still had a pretty good idea of who was going to win, right? Especially the Will Howard situation, transferred in, that type of thing. Like, Julian Sayin came here, former 5-star kid, super talented, things like that. But where I think things get interesting is Lincoln Kienholz is in year 3, right? He's been in this offense even with some changes with different coordinators and whatnot. He's been in this Ryan Day Buckeye offense now. This is his third offseason doing this. He's had multiple years now where he's focused solely on football. Remember, this is a kid who played baseball and basketball in high school, which we'll get to in a second. And the idea that just because Julian Sayin was a former 5-star prospect and was originally committed to Alabama, that he's going to win the job, I think is a bit short-sighted. Again, I do think Julian Sayin will be Ohio State's starting quarterback in 2025, but I think Lincoln Kienholz's experience and his athletic ability, I just talked about, those different sports that he played. And look, a lot of guys play different sports in high school, right? This isn't anything new, but he was really good at all three. He was playing in South Dakota, maybe not against the best competition in the world, which is why it's taken him some time and the football aspect of things to sort of develop. But from the little bits we've gotten to see, and we will get to see more, we're recording this on Friday. Saturday is the Student Appreciation Day practice where we get to watch the entire thing. You see some good things. You see some, they don't show everything. They don't want every student that has a phone to be able to, put out their plays or anything like that. But it is a good kind of informative practice. So we'll get a better look at that. Ohio State had its first scrimmage of the spring this past weekend. And I think from talking to people, hearing some different things, I think based on what I've seen from other reporting, at least what people talk about on our message boards from other sites and things like that, it does sound like Lincoln Kienholz had the better day during the scrimmage. And again, I don't think that is overly surprising, because I think that, he is while not the incumbent, he is the guy who understands this offense better than Julian Sayin, just from a pure being in it standpoint. And then the athletic ability. And I don't think you can discount that. And that's not to say that Julian Sayin is not athletic. He certainly is, but he is not a guy. He's more of a move in the pocket type of guy, I believe, than a guy who is going to escape the pocket multiple times and be able to pick up yards. Can he do it? Yes. Does he do it? That doesn't seem to be as much of a part of his game as what Lincoln Kienholz can do. So I think you have to kind of look at the whole picture here. And if you're an Ohio State coach, you have to give these guys a fair shot, right? This isn't Justin Fields, and I think it was Chris Chuganoff, where we know Justin's going to be the guy. We have to go through this off-season competition because you can't just hand a guy the job. And I think Lincoln is going to make this as difficult as he can. And I think that's only a good thing for Ohio State, because I think come next season, you want whoever is the starter to have been pushed as much as possible in this offseason so that they're better for it, right? And I think that, whether it's Julian or Lincoln, the other guy will have made this, made his other quarterback better by the way that they're going to push throughout the offseason. And I also think you need guys to be ready. Ryan Day was asked about this recently with the quarterbacks. And last year with Will Howard, the only time Devin Brown really had to come in was against Michigan State for a couple plays, and then against Michigan. But it was just a few plays one way or the other. So, but Will Howard is also 6'4", big guy. Lincoln Kienholz and Julian Sayin are not nearly the size, the height, the girth, for lack of a better term, of Will Howard. And so could one of these guys get banged up at some point? It's possible. You hope it doesn't happen, right? But it's definitely possible, especially if the Buckeyes go on another long run in the postseason. So I think you have to have that backup ready. And that's another reason why I think this will go as long as possible. Not as long as possible, but it will extend, because I think both guys realize they need to be ready regardless. Just because that you saw it at points with the quarterback. You saw it with a bunch of positions, and we'll get to some of that later last season with injuries. And you will need guys to be ready. And you may have noticed I've not mentioned Tavian St. Clair. I think Tavian St. Clair is probably just like Lincoln Kienholz was when he arrived, Kyle McCord, CJ Stroud, all of these guys. I think he's probably needs a year Talent is certainly there, but I think the jump in level from high school to college, but also especially coming from smaller school in Bellefontaine, didn't play the toughest schedule. I think he needs a year to kind of settle in. Will he be a part of this competition? For sure. Do I think he's winning it? Probably not. That's why I didn't mention him. But I do think it is true that this is a real quarterback competition. Cheers. I see we've got some good questions in there. I see them. If any of them align with exactly with what I'm talking about, I'll bring it up. If not, we will get to those. Feel free to throw more in there. Like I said, I love conversation, comments, questions, all of that. I enjoy doing that with you guys. So feel free, whatever you want to throw in there. Keep it topical, please, and polite. The next true or false is that, well, there's I'm going to break this one into two. The first one is Ohio State has its starting two tackles right now. Like if they were to play a game on Saturday, the two tackles are ready to go. I'm not necessarily talking about going in the transfer portal and getting them, but in terms of development. And this one, I'm going to go false. I think that the tackles on this roster, and I think most people expect the two transfers, Ethan Onyanwa and Philip Daniels, who we got to talk to this week. Really impressive in talking to both of them. But I think they are the presumed starters, right? Even though last time we were out at practice, it was Ian Moore and Austin Serveld, I think everyone kind of expects that it will be those two. Are those two ready? I'm not so sure. And I talked about this a little bit last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago maybe. But the experience for Ethan Onyanwa is at Rice. And he played he played three. He started for 3 seasons, basically, 2 at right tackle, 1 at left tackle. My understanding is there's still a good deal of development that needs to happen with technique and footwork and things like that. Like he's big, he's strong, he's lost weight so that he's playing it at a better weight than they want for him. But some of the more technical things that maybe he got by with from being big and strong at Rice, he's going to have to develop over these next handful of months before the season starts to be a starting left tackle at Ohio State. And I think you saw similar things with Josh Simmons coming from San Diego State to Ohio State. You were able to get him ready to start by the time the season started. Now, were there some growing pains? Yes. Was he better as a second-year player at Ohio State? Yes. Ethan Onyanwa doesn't have that time. He also does have more college experience. Philip Daniels started the last few games of last year for Minnesota, so at least he's played in the Big Ten, but Minnesota wasn't planning to start Philip Daniels. It was kind of a needs thing where guys got hurt. They had to move guys around. Philip Daniels did fine, but is Minnesota fine good enough for Ohio State to be your starting right tackle? Probably not. If you want to accomplish what the Buckeyes want to accomplish. I say that knowing what happened last year and what the Buckeyes did accomplish at that position, at the entire offensive line, really. So I think that is those are two guys I think I need to hear and see more hear about and see more development, because what they've done thus far, I don't think is yes, those guys are surefire, ready to start tackles at Ohio State. You didn't go get that guy, I don't think. Obviously, that can change, and come, I think it's August 30th against Texas, those two could be out there. They could have really good games, and I will be the first to say, look at the development they made. That's great to see. That was a concern of mine. Beyond those guys, okay, who else do you have at tackle? Well, I mentioned Austin Serveld. I mentioned Ian Moore. Austin Serveld played a good amount last year, but that was a guard. Ian Moore would be playing his first real snaps of his college career. So are those two guys ready for that spot yet? I don't think so. I think that really for me is if we're talking about starters on the offensive line, like that is where I'm concerned most, because I do think The interior, you've got guys coming back that played, have done well, all that. You can throw Carter Lowe, I guess, in with the tackles as well. True freshman. Is he ready? Probably not. He just got on campus a couple months ago, I guess I should say. So like that for me is the biggest thing. I don't think that Ohio State's tackles, as they are on this day, early April, are ready to go and play a game, especially knowing you have Texas week 1. That can change, but I think that is something to consider. The other true or false I'd have here with the offensive line, kind of grouping these together, is true or false. There's enough depth on this Buckeye offensive line. And this one I'm going to kind of fall in the middle, because if you look at the numbers, I think you feel pretty good about it, right? The guys we just mentioned at the tackle spots, Luke Montgomery coming back, Carson Hinsman, Tegra Shabola, behind those guys, the Armstrong twins, Gabe Van Sickle, Carter Lowe. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple guys. The numbers are there, but if pick your starting right tackle, for instance, if he goes down, is the next guy ready? Do you feel confident about that? I don't think I do right now. On the interior, I think a little bit more. Like, let's just say, for example, Luke Montgomery, Tegra Shabola are your starting 2 guards. Just an example. If one of those guys goes down, you can put Austin Sareveld right in, and I don't think you'll feel negatively about it. You've seen him do that. If Carson Hinsman is your starting center, he could also move, by the way, to a guard position. And Josh Padilla is somebody that Ohio State's pretty high on. Now, he hasn't played very much, so the experience isn't there. But I just think you feel better about the depth on the interior in terms of, hey, if I need to stick a guy in a game, he's ready to go. Now, what I will say, and I think this is interesting that Ohio State's doing this offseason, is Ryan Day kind of framed it as they're giving players their primary position and their secondary position. And I think that helps to create that depth. I think that they, having worked at multiple spots, makes it easier to do something like Ohio State did last year. Obviously, you hope you don't have the injuries, you don't have the issues that you did last year, moving guys around, but you will be more prepared, I think, because guys have practiced at different spots. I think that makes a lot of sense for the Buckeyes. So I think that helps with the depth, but you still have to build it, and these guys have to be ready and whatnot. So cheers. Again, keep them coming in the chat. I saw some questions, some comments and stuff in there. We'll get to those at the end, even if we recycle over some stuff, because my true or false will not take us nearly as long as last week's podcast did. So we'll have some time. My next true or false, CJ Hicks at defensive end. And I don't even think defensive end is the right term. Like, I think he will be used in a hybrid. Like, I know he's working with the defensive ends right now, but I imagine, at least in the way Matt Patricia has sort of talked about it, this is more of a hybrid spot. I don't want to call it the Jack because I don't know if they're giving it a name, but I think that, well, true or false, that's a real thing. And like, look, I think CJ Hicks is going to be on the field, and I think he's going to play some defensive end, line up on the edge, standing, whatever, however it works out. But I just don't know how big of a deal it is. So I'm leaning more towards false, not in the sense that I don't think we're going to see CJ Hicks only in garbage time, which is basically what he's done for his first 3 seasons. I think you'll certainly see him more than that. But like, as much as this has been talked about, this role for him and this positional move, where is it going to come? Is he going to be able to supplant somebody else? You assume you've got your 2 starting linebackers in Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles. Well, those guys are going to play, assuming health, the majority of the snaps. Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, starting defensive ends. So like, somebody has to come off the field for CJ Hicks to come in. Who's that going to be? What is the situation? Are you only going to use him in pass rushing situations? Is he only a rushman guy? If that's the case, is CJ Hicks okay with that for his final year of college football before he hopefully goes off to the NFL? Like, For me, this is one of those things that you hear a lot about, like the jack position in the offseason. And then we get to the season and the games start coming. And to quote, I forget who sings the song, the games start coming, they don't stop coming. I think it's just hard for me to envision this being a really, really big part of the defense. Cheers. I hope that they find a way to use CJ Hicks more, because I think he's a talented kid who hasn't been used in the right way for most of his Ohio State career. But to me, just like picturing this defense, assuming there isn't some kind of drastic change, which I do not expect, where does CJ Hicks fit in? When does CJ Hicks fit in? And I think when you have those kind of conversations where there's not really an answer, it tends to be something that, unless it's forced to get CJ Hicks in the game due to injury or something, I just don't know, and I'll be, if they come out against Texas and they have this package for CJ Hicks and, he's in and out of the game and whoever's coming out, I'll be perfectly happy to say, hey, look, I'm glad they figured it out. I was wrong on that one. But it just seems, I don't know. It seems a little strange to me that there's this role that, I don't know. You don't, there's no clear defined spot yet. It'd be one thing if he were playing defensive end and Ohio State didn't, say just Caden Curry were coming back, for instance, and there was an opening at the other defensive end spot, and there's not a clear replacement guy there. Then I'm like, okay, CJ Hicks moving to defensive end. Yeah, he's got some things he has to work on. It's going to be interesting to see how he evolves there, but there's a clear spot that he could step into and take over and make his own. Now it's like he's a backup that may step in, and I don't know if that ends up happening as much as we have talked about it this offseason. Again, I think he'll be on the field. I think he can rotate in like Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson did last year. Maybe he can be one of the defensive linemen in the Rushman package. Maybe they take a nickel back off in certain situations and he comes off the edge, from a stand-up spot. But I'm just not sure that the role is as defined as you probably like it to be. The next one is true or false. Ohio State has its nickel set in stone. And this one, I think most people would agree is false. But I wanted to bring this up because I don't think we've talked about the nickel that much. Cheers to Jordan Hancock. But that spot with Jordan Hancock last year was so crucial to what Ohio State did. And I think that replacing that is an underrated story this offseason, because I think people have thought, oh, you just stick a corner in there and whether it be a guy like Lorenzo Styles Jr., who's played that, or a younger guy like Aaron Scott Jr., or somebody. I don't think it will be as easy of a fix, because Jordan Hancock did a lot for Ohio State in that defense, especially the second half of last season, when sometimes he's closer to the line of scrimmage in that nickel spot. Sometimes he's dropped deep safety, lets Caleb Downs be closer to the line in sort of a different role. So who is that guy, and how do you is it one guy? Remember, 2 years ago, Jordan Hancock was sharing that with Sonny Styles. Do you do something like that? There are a lot of cornerbacks on this roster. How do you mold one of them into that role? Because it's not just the same thing. You're just covering a quicker guy or a tight end or something on the inside. There's a lot to that role, and especially the way Ohio State has used it and the way that I think they will use it. So I think that's a position that's going to need to develop this offseason and need to develop in a big way, because somebody's got to play it, and it's got to be the right guy, the right role. fit the defense, fit that player, all of those things. And look, as good as Jordan Hancock was at last season at the end, like there's a reason he was splitting reps with Sonny Styles. And it wasn't just because of their size and matching up with different personnel. That was certainly a part of it. But Jordan Hancock had to grow into that role. And, maybe Sonny Styles, because he has some experience, Lorenzo Styles, because he already has some experience with it. Maybe he does grow into that role. But I think that's something that, I wanted to kind of, I don't know if it was really true or false, but I wanted to kind of bring it up in there because I don't think we've talked about it a lot. I haven't seen it talked about a lot, but missing that player is big for Ohio State. Jordan Hancock was a huge part of last year's defensive success, and I don't think you just replace that by throwing any cornerback into that role and expecting him to just be able to do all of the things. Now, maybe you start slowly and you kind of grow that position, sort of like they did last year. It changed throughout the season, but certainly a spot that Ohio State will have to fill, and I think probably easier said than done, given what that role has asked. Cheers. Again, if you questions, comments, throw those in there in the chat. I see a lot of people, some things that must have just popped up. We're not going to, just to clarify, we're not going to talk about anything happening at other outlets. I just kind of see a little bit. I don't even know what's going on necessarily because I'm busy recording this. But I will not be addressing what's happening at other websites. You can find that stuff out elsewhere, but we will answer questions, talk towards the end. I only have a couple more of these true or falses. True or false? Ohio State will regularly play more than 2 running backs. I know this is something that Dave Biddle has talked about quite a bit, and I brought it up last week about 3 running backs. Could they work 3 running backs in? If you look at last season, they had a total of 534 carries. 194 of those went to Quinshon Judkins. 144 went to Travion Henderson. Another 105 went to Will Howard. So, depending on what happens with the quarterback, is the quarterback kind of the third runner? I think Lincoln Kienholz could do some things like that. But we're talking specifically running backs here. I think that you've got 2 guys that are pretty clearly the front 2 with James Peoples, second-year player, and C.J. Donaldson coming in from West Virginia. How those 2 work in comparison to Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, I think it'll be different. But I think in terms of the load, I have to imagine it's similar. So what is the third guy? Or, where would that third guy come from? I talked about this last week. Like Sam Williams-Dixon makes a lot of sense as if you're going to have 3. But he's more of a Curtis Samuel type, not a traditional running back. That doesn't mean he couldn't get some carries, but I think if he's in there, he can do some different things, catch the ball out of the backfield, that kind of stuff. Bo Jackson, I know people are excited about him. Is he going to be ready to take on a third of the load? I don't know. I think that I would say false to that in terms of the 3 running backs. I think it will be a lot more like last year. And maybe that third running back, because James Peoples had 49 carries last year. So maybe that third running back has closer to like 60, 70 because you lose the Will Howard carries, especially if Julian Sainz your quarterback. So I think that there could be room for a bigger role for a third running back, but I don't know. I don't think Ohio State goes three guys that all kind of do the same thing. Again, I think Sam Williams-Dixon could play a lot more than he did last year, maybe even more than James Peoples did last year. And then you have a running back out there that isn't those 2. But I think he's probably going to line up in the slot if they need him to at sometimes or things like that. So for me, I think when you look back at the end of 2025, I think the split of running back carries will look very similar to what they did in 2024. I don't know if there's a way for a third back, unless say Bo Jackson just lights it up the rest of spring, has a great fall. If he's doing really well, you got to find a way to get him on the field, right? But is a freshman going to be ready to do that? Maybe as the season goes on, he gets a bigger role. But like James Peebles is a pretty good running back. He was not needed. Was he ready? Probably. He probably could have done some stuff last year, more than he did. But he wasn't needed because of the guys you had, the production you were getting out of Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. I now think you'll get that production from CJ Donaldson, James Peebles, different backs, but I think you'll get similar production and you won't need a third guy. That's my thought. So false, I think, on 3 running backs, kind of splitting the workload. Though I do think maybe one could be on the field more than a year ago. And then my last true or false for the Buckeyes will be, I figured we had to do the receivers, right? So best receiving room in the country. And this is more, again, just to talk receivers. And I think if you look at I think this is the best receiving room in the country. And I'm going to kind of include the tight ends in with this group because I want to talk about that a little bit as well. But how much of it will we see? Again, I think similar to the running backs, you've got your top 3 receivers, right? You've got Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate returning on the outside. And then Brandon Inniss slots right in the slot where Emeka Egbuka was a year ago. And Brandon Inniss and Emeka Egbuka aren't the same player. And I really like what Brandon Inniss can bring to this. But that's the spot that he'll step in. And so from there, you've got a number of guys that could also step in. Bryson Rogers, Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter, the freshman. And then if we're talking tight ends, okay, you just brought in Max Clare, who caught over 50 passes at Purdue a year ago. You still have Jelani Thurman, who is a pass catcher more than he was a blocker coming in. And, we haven't seen it a ton, but I think you will see some more of that. And then the other guys, Will Kazmarek can make some catches. You saw that a little bit last year. The Bennett Christian can do some things in the pass game. Those guys probably more on the blocking side. But you look at this group and like how does the ball get spread around? What happens? And I think it's a good problem to have for Ohio State. Like that's kind of my question with Max Clare, because this room is so good, this wide receiver room. Like, what was the point of bringing in Max Clare? Now, when talking to people about it, like Keenan Bailey said when I asked him about it, when we spoke with him, like he thinks Max Clare actually is in a better situation, despite maybe not being the primary guy, definitely not being the primary guy in the pass game, because he'll get more one-on-one looks with the receivers that Ohio State has. So like, I think there's a way, maybe the numbers, again, let's look at Ohio State's wide receiver numbers last year. Emeka Egbuka had 81 catches. Jeremiah Smith had 76. Carnell Tate had 52. G. Scott, 27. The running backs actually, Travion Henderson had 27 catches too. Quinshon Judkins had 22. So, maybe that spreads out a bit more, especially if Brian Hartline goes deeper than really 3 receivers, which possible. He hasn't rotated like he did once upon a time in a while, but there's certainly the room to do that. Plus now you've got at least 1, if not 2, talented receiving tight ends. I think Will Kazmarek continues to grow in that department, and you have a lot of options. So yeah, I think true that this is the best receiver in the country. I will say I haven't looked at every school's wide receiving room, but I do think that it is hard. It would be hard for me to find a group that I'm like, yep, that's a better pass catching group. And, it starts with Jeremiah Smith, obviously, and then going through that whole list. And then my last true or false is not so much, well, it's not really a true or false. It's more, I just want to touch on some basketball things and just kind of clarify, I guess. So, it's sort of true or false in the sense that, like, I think there is some misconception about this basketball team and what Jake Diebler wants to do. And I posted about this on the Front Row message board, so you may have kind of heard a little bit about this. But I know they're like, okay, so Ohio State landed the center, Christoph Tilley from Santa Clara the other day. And from talking to some people about it, like this is not a guy who's going to get 10 rebounds a game in the Big Ten. I think he has something like 20 double-doubles in his career. He averages, if you include his entire career, like 4-point-something rebounds per game. Ohio State wants to play an up-tempo, shoot-the-ball type of style under Jake Diebler. And you saw some of that at the end of the 2023-2024 season when he was the interim coach and into the NIT. This is not the traditional Big Ten style of play. And the way that they've recruited, I know they didn't play that way a ton last year because, frankly, they didn't have the players to do it. But I think the idea behind it is that if you can get out and run, you can play fast. You saw it work at the end of the Big Ten season that year. Now, you did have Felix Akpar in there as kind of an anchor as a center. But I think that, when you're thinking about the way that this roster is going to be built under Jake Diebler, I think we have to move away from that traditional Big Ten, classic center. Cheers to Shaq and the old school centers. But like that dominant big man, that's not really how Ohio State is going to play. Now, will it work? I think you can. I think that you have to score. You have to be able to shoot. You're going to lose some on the inside if you don't have that. But as I posted on the front row, like Jared Sullinger wasn't a 7-foot monster, right? He was 6'9" is what he was listed at. Now he was built big, so he could pound down in the paint with some, and it was obviously the Big Ten was a little bit different then, but they got a 7-footer. So I think that is important, but he is not that type of, bruising big man shot blocking type of center that I think people have kind of thought you need in the Big Ten. And, the guys on the outside, like they need guys that want to get the ball and run. They want to push tempo. If they don't want to be in a half court set, it's not the Golden State Warriors. If you watch the NBA when the Warriors were in their heyday, but it's a similar idea. I mean, if any of you ever watched the Jake and John Diebler's dad coach, like it was tempo. The Warriors didn't invent this. They're just an obvious example to use that people know. And so I think that is kind of the way that Ohio State is looking at building this roster and wanting to play. And so, for me, it's more about getting guys that can shoot, that are long, I guess is the word, that have length. And so I think the true or false part of this is like, it is false that they are building what I think most people expect is like this Big Ten contending roster. They're looking at doing it a different way, which we'll see what happens in the Big Ten. I think this past year, you didn't see them play as much as that way, but they were close in some games they didn't win. We'll see we'll see how it works, but that's the idea. It's not the standard, way I think most coaches have built their Big Ten roster. I think that's going to change too, especially with the addition of some of the teams we saw from the Pac-12. Like the Big Ten isn't just those teams anymore. And look at the tournament success. I think, Jake Diebler's kind of keeping an eye on that and what they could potentially do. Now you got to get to the tournament, something that's been a struggle. But I wanted to touch on that as well. All right. Lots of questions, lots of comments. I like this. Let's get to some of these before we wrap it up. And cheers. And thanks to you guys for tuning in and being a active participant this week. I love it. Robert McIntosh, have you been able to see Heartline call plays yet? No, not really. We've seen him with the headset on. We've only been in for 2 practices, and those were early on. And we were only there for probably a little under an hour at each of them, even if that. So, no, I wouldn't say that. Now, he's had the headset on. He's communicating with the quarterbacks. From my understanding, it is going pretty well, but they also, they've had one scrimmage, right? I think on Saturday, when we get a chance to go for the Student Appreciation Day practice, we'll get a better sense of that because he'll be, we'll be able to be there for the whole thing. They'll do some stuff. But no, we have not seen him in that type of setting at this point. But I do think there's optimism about the way things have gone in that department. Nancy Snyder-Hart, did the team get their championship rings? I don't believe so. I haven't seen anything about it. I think that when that happens, there will be social media posts and all sorts of stuff, as there typically are with championship rings. I would imagine team is going to the White House the Monday after the spring game. I don't know if these championship rings are ready yet. Obviously with pro sports, you're able to, do it at the start of next season because you generally have most of those guys back. That's not the case with this team. So, I don't know if they'll do any sort of presentation, but I would assume at some point this offseason they will get those. I've not seen anything yet. Robin McIntosh again. What have you seen different from Matt Patricia and Tyler Bowen with their style of coaching? Now, again, we've only been in parts of practices, so hard to answer exactly from what I've seen. From talking to people, start with Matt Patricia. I think that the kind of hard ass reputation that he has been dispelled a little bit. Talking to some players, like they really like the way that he's approached things and getting to know guys and things like that. I think that, we will, I think right now is a very early time for both of these guys because they're still getting to learn their players. They're still getting to learn exactly what Ohio State wants to do. I will say with Tyler Bowen, he has I think there's 4 offensive line focused coaches. When you kind of talk about his assistants and the GAs or whatever, the analysts, whatever they're being called now. So it is funny to watch offensive line drills or, even 7 on whatever it is where, full team stuff, because as soon as the play's over, there's like 4 guys going to different players to talk to them. And actually Tyler Bowen was asked about, how you keep that messaging the same when you're having 4 different guys coach a player. And he said that's really important, that they have to start at the top with Brian Hartline and work their way down to make sure that everything is the same in the way they're teaching and things like that. So I think he has a pretty good idea, but it's been different for sure. Matt Patricia is definitely different than Jim Knowles. Tyler Bowen, Justin Fry, I don't know if they're that different as guys, but in terms of the way that they're doing things. Let's see here. Matt Rannells, I see your question about recruiting. I just don't know enough about that. So I don't want to say something, and it's just not my specialty. When I do know things about recruiting, I certainly feel comfortable sharing them. I would ask Bill Kurlick or Mark Porter about that recruiting question, but I wanted to acknowledge that I see it. But you said we need that dual threat quarterback, run and pass. Look, I think to have that ability, you saw it last year with Will Howard, even though he didn't run, people knew he could. And that is important. That's, again, going back to the top of the show, why I think part of the reason I think Lincoln Kienholz is going to make this a real competition is because he does bring that. And again, not that Julian Sain can't do it, but if you don't do it, if you haven't done it, it's some quarterbacks are more natural as runners, even though, guys may be athletic, they just haven't done it or don't feel as comfortable doing it. I think Lincoln Kienholz certainly brings that there. Speaking of Lincoln Kienholz, Michael Hester, do you think Lincoln will enter the portal if Sain is running with the ones? So from my understanding, they've really not focused on who's with the ones, who's with the twos, with the quarterbacks. It's just been kind of a rotational thing, and I think that's probably intentional. Now, I will say Ryan Day has in the past, and I assume he will do this again, met with the quarterbacks at the end of spring, given them a kind of an honest assessment of where things stand. I talked to Lincoln Kienholz. This was back before the Rose Bowl, I believe. He admitted that he knows that that's a possibility out there. And if he doesn't win the job, that might be something he'd have to do in the future. I think this offseason, I don't think there will be a clear favorite coming out of spring. Everyone has eyes. They all know how it's going. So they'll know kind of where guys stand. But I think it will still be very much a competition going into fall camp. So I don't think Lincoln Kienholz. Now that could change. Maybe Julian Sand has a great rest of spring practice, and Ryan Day, he says he's honest with these guys. But I think it will stay competition, and Lincoln remains with the Buckeyes after spring practice would be my prediction there. Matt Reynolds, St. Clair, put on some more weight and stronger development. Yeah, all of that is important. Fortunately, he was around the program a lot since he committed, even before he committed. So he knows a lot of things. But who was it that said that? Brian Hartline, maybe? Maybe Billy Fessler. I think it was Billy Fessler said, being around the program and kind of seeing it from there while you're also still thinking about your high school team and games on Friday nights and trying to win a state championship is very different than when you get here and this is all you're doing. And now you have to go execute this stuff and you have to do it against guys that are bigger, faster, stronger than guys you've ever played against. So yes, he has to do all those things. He has to get stronger. He has to put on more weight. He has to develop. All of those things are important for Tavian St. Clair. And that's why I said, I think as is normal, he's probably a year or two, probably a year. I don't know about two, from really being a factor in any quarterback competition. Could prove me wrong, but that's kind of how I understand it. And look, I'd say that about almost any quarterback that walks in the door. This isn't just Tavian St. Clair. Certainly there are quarterbacks who walk into programs and, can start from day one. We've seen it at Ohio State from time to time, but usually I think you need a year or so to do all those things we just talked about. Doug Shepard Sr., I know it's early, but do you think Ohio State will expand rotation on the offensive line to keep guys fresher than the opposition? It's a good question. I was very anti the rotation that Ohio State did going into that Tennessee game, and it worked, no doubt about it. But I'm still more of a believer that you have to get your five and you have to have that chemistry. Now, Ohio State was able to overcome a lot of that last year. Can that happen a lot? I don't know. You also have to have the depth, right? We talked about that earlier. Do they have the depth at tackle? I don't know. I think that will, be determined at time. Could they rotate the guards? Potentially, look, if you have, let's just assume that Carson Hinsman is your starting center. I think that's probably what it'll be, but let's just say that that's going to happen. Then you've got Austin Saraveld, Tegra Shabola, and Luke Montgomery again as your guards. Those are guys that have played a lot of football. What are you going to do? Could you rotate those guys? I think they showed that they could last year. Does Tyler Bowen want to do that? I don't know. So I think it's possible, but you have to have the depth. And look, in a lot of the games Ohio State's going to play, those guys are going to get in anyway. So do you rotate? I don't know. I don't think they do it just to do it, to stay fresh. Offensive line play has happened for a long time where they haven't needed to do that, and defensive lines rotating, and you're able to figure it out, right? Robert McIntosh, has Heartline decided on where he's calling plays from yet? I don't believe so, at least not publicly. It's a good question, and I think there are arguments for both sides. I think it's easier to call plays from up in the booth where you're in a quiet, sterile environment. But Heartline is also very engaging with his players on the sideline. And, you would lose some of that with him going up to the booth. But I think that's something we'll probably find out about during fall camp. Michael Hess said, I think they have the two tackles here, whether they are ready or not, with a lot of dots. Yes, I agree. I mean, I don't think they're going to go to a portal after spring and maybe they could find one guy better. It depends what happens. But, and I don't want to take away from the guys they have in the roster. I think Ethan Onianwa and Philip Daniels are good players. I just think they need to develop to be ready to play for Ohio State. And I still think that can happen. If the right guy jumps in the transfer portal, do they do it? I don't know. You did already bring in two tackles from the transfer portal, but it is a ruthless game. Let's see. Doug Shepard Sr. says, I have a feeling that Ian Moore plays significant minutes. Could be. We saw when we first got into spring practice, he was out there with the ones. All right. Yep, Matt Reynolds it's still early, but last year showed us we can have multiple starters hurt and now must be ready for backups. Yes, I think that's true at every position on this team. And I think every program in the country should be thinking that way after what you saw from Ohio State last season. I think guys have to be ready now more than ever. Charles Parks, how are the safeties looking other than Downs to you so far? Good. Again, when we've seen, again, first two practices, when we've seen them line up with not doing drills, full 11 on 11, like it's just kind of walkthroughs. So it's hard to judge. I like both Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford. I think I will have a better answer for that question after the Student Appreciation Day practice on Saturday. So maybe we can talk about that next week. Matt Reynolds, Hicks, Curry Jackson, how good will they be? I mean, it's definitely a good group. It's just a matter of figuring out how best to use them. And then Michael Hester, don't you think the offensive line needs to gel as a unit? Yeah, that's what we were just kind of talking about there. That's the way I think of offensive line. Maybe we are, maybe Ohio State found something that everyone starts to emulate now, and that kind of perception goes away. But I think that is the way that it is gone for a long time. Let's see if we've got anything else here. Charles Parks, I hope that players that lack a lot of game experience get better as the season goes on to be the team up north. Yeah, that'd be ideal, right? Cheers. I think you need to, these guys have to get experience. And again, you open with Texas. It's not going to be an easy one for a team with a lot of new guys, no doubt about it. Let's see. Terry Slusher, do you think they'll find an experienced QB for depth in the portal? I think if the right guy who's willing to kind of come in and like Tristan Gebbia a couple years ago, come in and be a backup and learn would be ideal, but not everybody is willing to do that, right? Most guys that jump in the portal want to go and find a place to play. Let's see. Charles Parks says Thornton is good, but he don't push the tempo like he should. Well, he did at the end of 2 seasons ago. I think they will, do that more. I think it was more this past season, talking hoops. A lot of the other guys. I think Bruce can definitely push the tempo. Jermaine Runnels, excuse me. What should OSU look at in the spring portal? Cough, kicker, cough. I think they like their kicker. I know he missed against Michigan, but he responded in the playoff. I thought, frankly, throughout the year that Jaden Fielding was pretty good, and he'll have another year of experience under his belt. So I don't know if they'll be out looking for that. Let's see. Okay, I think that's about it. Jermaine Runnels asked, what's the adult choice of beverage? We went garage beer today. So again, thank you guys for tuning in for this. If you watch this live, again, on YouTube, Facebook, whatever, please make sure you have liked or you're subscribed to our channels. That's where you're going to get all of our coverage. If it's Facebook, all of our videos, podcasts, YouTube, Facebook is you'll find all of our articles, Twitter, obviously all that stuff. And then YouTube, all the videos. If you're listening to this, please give a 5-star review. That all helps. It really does. I promise you that. Let's say cheers. Next week, we'll be heading into the spring game. I will probably be a little bit earlier in the week if I had to guess, but we'll figure it out. Stay tuned. And cheers, Buckeye fans.